Welcome back, everybody, and welcome for those that just joined us in this final panel. Our discussion today is going to be on power relations development cyberspace, and we count with 3 cybersecurity specialists. So the first one is Professor Dr. Danielle Jacon Ayres Pinto. She is a professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, coordinator of the research group on strategic studies and contemporary international politics, FGV, researcher of the Science, Technology, Innovation and Defense Network, Portuguese FGV SP, and we'll be discussing today on power relations and resource in the 21st century. We also count with Ms. Janine Schmoldt, who is a PhD student at the Erfurt University, giving seminars on cyber war and cybersecurity issues at the same university. And today, she'll be focusing on how hackers change the international balance of power and their use by states through power projection. And last but not least, we have Mr. Caio Mansini, who is a researcher in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, holding a master in international relations and political science by the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy, and today we'll expose the possibilities of cyber power quantification. Thank you all for your presence today in this panel, and let's start with Dr. Danielle's presentation. Please, Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bruna. Everybody listening? Okay? All right. So, good afternoon or good evening for everyone. And I would like to say that it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel and share with Janine and Caio, 2 great researchers and students. It's amazing for me. Thank you for inviting me, Bruna. And Bruna, I would like to congratulate you on your courage and responsibility in organizing the great event like this one. It's a great achievement. Congratulations for you, for Guilherme, Vanessa, Cicero. Great job you have done. It's amazing, guys. Congratulations. You deserve all the success of this event. So I would like to start my speech by saying, when you think in cyberspace, international power or balance of power, interstate dynamics in world order, it's impossible to not question myself about what is power, what is the characteristic of the power nowadays, and why that question is important. Because it's easy to understand that in the past, who has more hard resources of power were the most important actor in the international system. But in the 21st century, that reality has changed. Now we have 2 different dynamics of power that promote a new scenario for power in the international system. And they are transition of power and the diffusion of power. And what is transition of power? It's a typical 21st century phenomenon. In view of the rising up of middle power, such as BRICS, except China, obviously, the power begins to be in other hands, not only in the hands of the great powers or major powers, but in the hands of the middle power as well. The middle powers begins to be an important actor in the system and become capable to influence the decision of international system. That phenomenon changed the way that international order organizes itself. We don't have anymore a unilateral or a unipolar system, but we now have a multilateral or a multipolar system. And that's important when you're talking about interstate dynamics and cyber space and cyber security and cyber defense. Because for me, there is different in cyber defense and cyber security. You don't work here, work it today, but it's important to do that difference. So, in resume, what is transition of power and why this phenomenon is important? is when power is not longer concentrated in the hands of the great powers, but because other countries are still having capacity to influence and decision-making in the system. So we have another kind of interaction. And that is not really power to change the system, but it's a kind of power, and this is new. And what is diffusion of power? Fusion of power is linked with no-state actors and its capacity to act in the international system. Maybe Janine is speaking better with that in her presentation. And now, in the international sphere, other actors beyond the state become capable to act and to influence the international system dynamics. Groups like NGOs, individuals, social movements, or terrorist groups, that kind of people or group are able to act, to influence, and to promote some damage on the society. They have a new function in the logic of the international system. They are not longer a passive actor, but now they are an active agent of the system. And that is important because in the past, just state is a great actor of the international relation. But now we have another kind of agent, but how powerful they are in that space. We talk about that mais à frente, more forward. So nowadays, when you think about power, we don't think about amount of resource, but we must think about what had made the constant power able to change, and why states are no longer the unique powerful actor in the international system. For me, the answer of those questions are maybe three. First of all is the rise of the new technologies. The creation of new technologies of information and communication has produced another dynamic of the international sociability. And this has made all difference in how international actors are related to each other in the system. So we changed the way of our sociability. And obviously, we change the way how actors exercise power. The second answer is understand the cyberspace resource as a weapon. The countries and the no-state actors have seen this kind of resources as an opportunity to exercise power in the international system, especially because that kind of resource can be easy to access and they are cheaper as well. So everybody can take, can buy, but not produce. That is another question, okay? And the third answer that for respond to those questions that I have done, and it's availability to use and to obtain technological resource by non-state actors. The easy way to use that kind of resource is now it's a reality in the system today. Every group are able to buy a computer, a software, or a kind of hardware, and use that kind of technology to obtain advantages in the international sphere. So the technology and the cyberspace are available for everyone who wants to use them and to learn how to cause damage with them. But in this scenario, we needed to make another question to ourselves. The question is, who is more powerful in the cyberspace? The strong actors or the weak actors? That question for me is so important if you want to talk about balance of power in cyberspace. To answer that question, it's necessary to think as the same way as Israel military intelligence head did. They say, it's a strange phrase, but they say that in the document. Cyber grants to small countries and individuals a power that was heretofore the preserve of the great states. But if we're talking about USA, for example, it is different. That is not the main worry for them. This is because they are concerned about vulnerable that cyber capacity would mean in terms of damage to themselves. I explain. When states create a kind of a cyber weapon, like a Stuxnet worm made by USA and Israel, they spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of human resource to build it. But after that creation, the state concern is about how to protect themselves from the use of those weapons against them. So, what in the past was a special or a unique weapon, now, after being used for the first time, it is available to hackers and other actors to use them against the country that had created. Even considering that damage caused by the use of this weapon by hackers or other countries will not be as great as the damage caused in the first time. But the same state who had created that weapon now must protect itself from its own creation. And for me, it's a kind of paradox. When you think about cyberspace and the power and how to protect against cyber threats. But at the same time, there are two findings here when you're thinking in this paradox. First of all, it's necessary a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of human resource to create a cybernetic weapon, or a kind of cybernetic weapon. You can discuss what is cybernetic weapon as the first panel do. And who has those resources are the state, especially the great powers, the major powers. So it's not so easy to create a kind of weapon, cyber weapon in the international system. And the second finding is at the same time, those great powers are unable to prevent their cyber weapons to be used against themselves. But the second finding is not a big deal to the power of great powers, of the balance of power. It's just another concern about how those great powers defend this critical infrastructure against that kind of attack. But just that, the great powers will be more vulnerable against cyber attacks, and not less powerful in their ability to influence the international system and to decide about the global issues. So, to finish my presentation, we must remember the title of our panel and to make two conclusions. The title is Interstate Dynamics in Cyberspace and Their Consequence for International Relations Balance of Power. We are talking about interstate dynamics and relations, cyberspace, and balance of power. With that three concepts, as the first conclusion, I would like to say the balance of power in the international system will not change, not in the short term, because the countries who fight for power in the international system will be the same. Only one type, one kind of resource will change. They will have now the cybernetic resource to build weapons or to force the other actor to do what they want the others do. So, as the second conclusion, I can say, at the same time, the middle power and no-state actors can use that kind of resource to bargain in the international system and to get what they want in an easier way. So it's a kind of power, but not a power can be influenced in the balance of power in the international system. So maybe you can think more in the international relations. What is power? What is power in the 21st century? So this is important for me. I think it's important for the debate. So if you think in names of countries, China and the USA will continue fighting for power in the international system. And they will be, on the next decade, the most important countries in the battle of the balance of power. This is a finding because these two states have the great technological capabilities in the system to build weapons, to develop new technology and advancing technology. But on the other hand, we will see a significant event where middle powers and the no-state actor will influence the system, but they will be unable to fight the international balance of power in the next few decades because they don't have an effective capacity to develop advanced technologies and create and invest in money in that kind of area in the state. If you look at Brazil, you can understand that we are a kind of a regional power, but if you look at our investment in development of technology and like Wi-Fi technologies and internet technology or drones or something like that, we don't have any budget for that and any strategy and anything about that. So I think is that what I wanted to say. Thank you, Bruna. Thank you for attention of everybody. And thanks.
Thank you very much, Danielle. And now I pass the floor to Ms. Janine for her presentation.
So thank you, and thank you, Danielle, as well for your great presentation. And thank you, Bruna, as well for inviting me. And thank you for organizing this workshop. It's a great honor for me as well to be here and to present my topic. I want to focus on how hackers changed the international balance of power and therewith international relations and the international system. And I think that this is particularly relevant due to two reasons. First, hackers, and especially patriotic hackers, are already operating as the third party, as independent players in international and non-international armed conflicts, and changed the rules of the game already. And second, hackers are used as proxies to mount cyber attacks by nation states such as Iran or North Korea. So what we know is that different cyber actors operate in cyberspace, for instance, script kiddies or hacktivists such as Anonymous. But the most dangerous cyber actor is, however, the patriotic hacker and or the cyber proxy. Because patriotic hackers are already out there. They already operate in cyber armed conflicts as independent players. And just to present a definition, patriotic hackers are all those hackers that conduct cyber attacks on their own initiative against a perceived threat by an enemy of the state or attacking countries involved in a conflict with their own. So rather than being state organs, government institutions, or members of the state's armed forces, patriotic hackers are private citizens, civilians. Driven by patriotism, they defend their homeland or national pride. And we have seen that already in the two cyber wars against Estonia and Georgia, where Russian patriotic hackers got active. But interestingly, the first patriotic hackers emerged in China, where they also conduct numerous cyber attacks against different states. For instance, against Indonesia, against Taiwan, Japan, and the United States as well. But those hackers also emerged in other countries and regions, in Pakistan, in India, in Israel and Palestine as well. Or if you look more recently, if you remember the 2016 US presidential election, hackers were also involved. So those hackers operate in cyber wars as well as in actual armed conflicts. The Russian-Georgian War illustrates that. Operation Allied Force, Operation Car Fleet, or Operation Pillar of Cloud, the Second Lebanon War, or the Russian-Ukraine conflict of 2015 illustrates that. So it's quite common to see patriotic hackers take up arms, and they join into wars as independent players. They have already become powerful actors in the international area. They not only replaced combatants, they rather changed the rules of the international system. By conducting cyber attacks during actual conflicts in support of the homeland, patriotic hackers have shown to be inherently dangerous by changing the rules of armed conflict. While a single soldier was previously unlikely to significantly impact international affairs, skilled hackers can now independently steal vulnerable secrets and launch impressive cyber attacks. We have already seen that. Those hackers not only fight hacking wars against each other, they can also ignite a hacking war between rival countries, which has the potential of drawing these states into actual armed conflict. So this, in fact, shows us that international conflicts no longer require a state or state sanction. Hacker wars instead involve citizens from different states to fight or hack against each other without governmental direction. But more than that, hackers also elevate their role in politics by getting support from nation states to work with them rather than sanctioning them. And simultaneously, those hackers are seen as an inherent threat to the stability of nation states, such as, for instance, China. The Chinese government has made clear that Chinese patriotic hackers are a powerful threat to the Chinese government because they are a large politically active organization capable of subverting Chinese political stability. And because of that, the Chinese government, for instance, supports those hackers in order to control them. And therewith, the hackers get a voice within the political area. But this is just one side of the story told from the perspective of the hackers. From a state perspective, we must be keenly aware of the fact that hackers are also incredibly useful. They not only enhance the cyber warfare capabilities of the supporting states, they provide these supporting states also with a degree of plausible deniability. And this brings the state a future superpower status. And in a principal-agent relationship, for instance, the hacker then becomes a cyber proxy who works for the state. And to present a brief definition of cyber proxies are non-state actors who conduct cyber attacks or cyber operations in order to achieve a political objective on behalf of a patron state. A patron state may provide training, equipment, and logistical support to a cyber proxy, enabling them to fight indirectly on its behalf. So the benefits those cyber proxies bring states really challenge international relations and the international balance of power. Three facts will illustrate that. First of all, cyber proxies avoid attribution. Because through the support of cyber proxies, states maintain plausible deniability. Hackers are able to avoid attribution to cyber operations since they can launch cyber attacks with little or with no attribution. And therewith, they protect governments or states from the legal consequence of conducting cyber attacks. And similarly, they also shift the problem of attribution. The problem is then no longer who carried out the attack, but rather does the state have or has control and command over the cyber proxy. Again, the cyber attacks against Estonia illustrates this. Konstantin Golubchikov, the Russian hacker, has claimed responsibility for the attack with his group. However, the attacks were just in part attributable to his group, and it's unclear whether the Russian Federation had a hand in the group's operation. And Michael Schmidt and Leslie Hull made clear that in particular, the relatively high levels of support that are required before states can be held responsible for the activities of non-state groups or individuals assisting from their own responsibility for being involved creates a normative safe zone for them. So this shows that cyber proxies and hackers are really, really useful for states. Another reason why states work with cyber proxies is to increase their cyber warfare capabilities. Tim Maurer makes clear that to project cyber power, states rely on hackers that do not wear uniforms and are not part of the intelligence community. And this also really challenged the international balance of power. Cyber proxies are then especially relevant for states when they lack the capability to conduct offensive cyber attacks. Well, we have China as well, who uses cyber proxies in order to deter the United States, for instance, which may ensure eventual strategic parity with the United States in technological and military power. And this also brings me to my last point. Cyber proxies co-opt threats. So through the support of cyber proxies, states have a certain degree of control through which they can direct the cyber proxy or the hackers away from launching cyber attacks against the state. So as I have already said, cyber proxies and hackers, patriotic hackers, constitute an internal threat, for instance, to China. So cyber proxies and hackers are already powerful actors. Supporting them means that they are directed away from operating against the state. And this brings me to my conclusion. I think that the power of hackers will grow in the future. By gaining a state support, hackers also get a seat at the table of political change. They already operate in armed conflict. They are already used as proxies, and they already changed international relations and the rules of the international system. And therewith, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Janine. In the presentations, Caio, the floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me today, Bruna, and thank you so much, Dr. Danielle, for your presentation, and thank you so much, Janine, for your presentation as well. My name is Caio. I'm going to be talking about cyber power and the possibility of quantification of power. Can you give me, Bruna, the ability to show the PowerPoint, please? So just 1 second. Technical problems. Okay, so let's go. Okay, that's good. Let's get going. Just a quick introduction. My name is Caio Mansini. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. I have a master's degree in international relations and political science by University of California, San Diego, School of Global Policy and Strategy. I am a cybersecurity researcher and a data scientist. Most of my work is on the edge between political science and cybersecurity. And my job in this presentation is actually to raise more questions than presenting answers and providing answers. And this is going to be a double-sided presentation. On the first side, we are going to talk a little bit about review of cyber power from the classics. We're going to briefly discuss what is cyber power and how power diffusion in cyberspace actually affects the balance of power in the international system. And in the second part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about the causality revolution and the future of the field. And causality revolution, I mean, especially in the United States, academia is using, and political science is using much more quantitative methods to find causality in actions and in policy making and in decision making. And I'm going to discuss briefly about empirical approaches to the study of cybersecurity. We are going to talk about how cyber events can shape battlefield outcomes. And I will finish my presentation by posing a question to you, which is, can we finally quantify power? So let's start the presentation by using Weber's definition of power, which is the ability of an individual or group to achieve their own goals or aims when others are trying to prevent them from realizing them. And this is basically the basic definition of power in social sciences. And with that in mind, let's talk about cyber power. And the first international relations theorist who theorized about cyber power was Joseph Nye in his paper Cyber Power. And he basically said that cyber power has three phases: coercion, and the biggest example of coercion is the disruption of systems of, like, for example, SCADA systems, electrical power grids, nuclear power grids, and etc. The second one is agenda control, and the big exponent of this phase of cyber power is the Chinese Great Firewall, in which China uses it to maintain its own agenda and within its borders. And the third is the power of influence, and he specifically says that power of influence in cyberspace is highly connected to fake news. And why fake news? Because it is possible to shape electoral outcomes when we are talking about cyber power in this last phase. And these three concepts, they're intertwined with the concept of zero-day vulnerabilities, which basically, for those who doesn't know, it's just a vulnerability that is found in a system that hasn't been found, that there is no correction for this vulnerability, and hackers, state like intelligence agencies, or cyber researchers, they use these vulnerabilities to use cyber power to their advantage using one of those three phases of power. And one of the things that is pretty interesting is that although we are talking about cybersecurity and we're talking about the phases of cyber power, most people, they don't actually understand where these relations take place. In international relations, we usually say that it's pretty abstract, but we usually say that interstate relations occur in the international system. And by international system, we understand this as some multilateral forums such as the United Nations or the World Trade Organization, or just purely diplomatic relations across embassies. But in this case, cyber power and interactions in cyberspace, they occur in cyberspace. And the formal definition of cyberspace is just the operational framework where electronic devices are used to exploit information via interconnected systems. And there are a couple of features that are interesting to talk about cyberspace super briefly. The first is that it's man-made, it's a human's creation, which is completely different from the geographical landscape. For example, we were able to create a cyberspace. We are able to connect devices to the cyberspace and make them talk to one another. But it's different in the sense that we do not have boundaries in cyberspace. And this is one of the questions, the first question that I would like to keep you in. I would like you guys to keep this question in mind, which is, if we were talking about privacy issues, if we're talking about legislative issues, we're talking about law, how can we, how the problem of jurisdiction will be translated into cyberspace, right? Because although we have, like, for example, we cannot say that there is a Brazilian cyberspace. We cannot say that there is an American cyberspace. Do we have jurisdiction in cyberspace? If so, where does it begin? Where does it end? Where are the boundaries? So this is one of the questions that I would like you to keep in mind. And the second feature that is pretty interesting about cyberspace is that the barriers to entry into this game are very low. But again, taking economist perspective here, it's the barriers are low comparative to other forms of military engagement, which and the example here are sea and air. But do not make a mistake. Although people say that it's relatively cheaper to engage in cyber actions against a more powerful country, you still need resources, you still need electric power, you still need high-skilled human resources, not only to produce, to create an efficient command and control system, but also to engage in cyber military operations. So this is one of the things that are also pretty interesting about cyberspace. And there's this hype around cyber power and cyberspace, and we're all here discussing about this issue and why this hype, of course. There are two main reasons for why that's the case. The first one is that cyber power can affect a wide range of domains and provide advantage in a wide range of things, from war to commerce. And this is one of the aspects that makes cyber security and this intersection between political science and computer sciences so interesting nowadays, especially with the development of ICTs and communication technologies. And the second one, which is the hardest to put into practice on an applied perspective, is the power diffusion. And power diffusion, the concept of power diffusion in cyberspace is pretty simple. Countries with relative low power can cause severe damage to relatively powerful countries. And the biggest example we can use is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, aka North Korea, can cause severe damage to the United States. Although some international relations theorists, they might pose that it is already possible for North Korea to cause severe damage into American soil. This is completely different from in the cyber arena, because the resources that the North Korea would use in cyber engagement are relatively cheaper, not only cheaper, but also stealthier, and they can cause severe damage into American territory. And I'm not only talking about taking control of electrical power grids and causing, deaths or casualties or anything of the sort, but I'm also talking about economic power. Let's remember that most countries believe that economic power is a national security, and this is no different from the United States. And one of the biggest representation of power diffusion is data breaches, right? This is just a simple graphical representation of data breaches that are happening from 2004 until 2019. We see that the companies that are bleeding in data breaches are the companies that we would judge as powerful and influential in our daily lives. And this is pretty, we as one fictional character say, this is a hell of a time to be alive, right? So this concludes the part of the theoretical aspect of cyberspace, and I would like to bring you to a more applied method and empirical evidence that we have into this field. There are not many, and we are going to discuss why there are not many. But hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you'll have something to think about and something to contribute to this area. So the question that we begin this part is, are there any empirical evidence that support these theories that we just discussed? And Khrushchev and Zhukov, they wrote a paper that is really interesting, and I highly recommend you to read this paper. And they pose a very simple question: can cyber attacks shape battlefield outcomes? They use data from the armed conflict in Ukraine and additional data from civil war, but we are going to focus here on the conflict in Ukraine and Russia for a specific reason. First, it was the first situation in which military action and cyber capabilities were deployed at the same time. And also, Russia was able to take control of the Ukrainian electrical power grids in the middle of the conflict. And their study shows that cyber attacks are not yet effective as tools of coercion in war. I'm going to show you some graphics next, but before we dive into the graphs, their idea it's pretty simple. They pose that they weren't able to find any statistically significant results in the data set that they were able to build, and they said that their hypothesis was that if you're engaging in cyber attacks, kinetic operations will diminish in response and vice versa. because cyber attacks will prevent that Russia needs to further escalate the conflict. Although we see spikes in cyber actions at this point, and the relatively diminish of kinetic operations into this side, on average, they weren't able to find any statistically significant results. And instead of just saying that they are not yet effective, they were able to find something else that was completely interesting in my perspective, which is cyber attacks actually occurs as just a response. It's not a proactive action, as people might, as some theorists were theorizing. They were not. It's not that the first. It's not that there's this theory that it's pretty widespread in international relations that whenever we are engaging in conflict nowadays, there's going to be a huge wave of cyber attacks, and then followed by this huge wave of cyber attacks, we're going to have military action, and that was not the case. In this conflict specifically, that was not the case. It was just cyber attacks, cyber actions. They were just a response of some actions, and you can see in this graph here that although there's some stimuli, on average, they usually converge towards zero, which means maybe it's let's say that we still haven't figured out the way of properly using cyber power and as a military way, as a form of military power, or maybe we are actually using something. We are theorizing. Maybe we're wrong. We are theorizing that cyber power can be used as a military power, but instead it's just an intelligence gathering tool. And with this study in mind, it gave us at the university a lot of insights, and this gave us a very weird idea at the time, but as time goes by, we are more and more convinced that it's possible to do this, which is we can finally quantify power, and this is one of the dreams that we have always been discussing in social sciences, because power is such an abstract thing, and there's no way to say, okay, actor A is more powerful than actor B. But we came with two very basic ideas, and the first is devices in the cyberspace. They are a double-edged sword, because they're at the same time the source of power and a weakness in cyberspace. In other words, with the same computer that I'm actually hacking someone's computer, I can be hacked. So they're a source of power and a source of weakness at the same time. And the second one is it's the landscape of the cyberspace. If devices, let's assume that devices are this double-edged sword. How power is distributed in cyberspace, right? It is possible thanks to technology, we wrote an algorithm that sent like a ping message every single device that's connected to the internet, and we are able to plot them in a map. So this is the result of our study, and basically we're able to capture roughly 32 billion devices connected to the internet, and every point that you're seeing to this map, it represents 1,000 devices. We collapse this entire information into a single point, and we are trying to try to plot this into a figure. And the first thing that you can see here is that, well, first of all, if you think as devices as a source of power in cyberspace, there's no much of a difference between cyberspace distribution of power and the real distribution of power. As you can see, the United States and European countries, they are pretty powerful if you think about that. On the other hand, we came up with a different idea. What about the devices that we were not able to find? We were not able to catalog. And what about the false positives? And there is another complication to the situation, which is we are not only talking about devices. We are talking about not every device is vulnerable. It's prone to be hacked. And how can we really find out which hosts are vulnerable in the first place? And a more important question, what are the ethical implications of that, right? So we had a couple of insights in this exercise. It seems simple, but I really hope you have these questions in mind. And I'm going to share with you some thoughts that we have, and we're going to conclude my presentation. And the first is that internet connection is, as I said previously, is highly correlated with electricity, but there's a possibility to use it in the future as a proxy for something else. And the example that we came up with was a proxy for economic activity. I do not know if you're familiar with the study that was conducted by Stephen Haggard, in which he was able to try to measure economic activity in North Korea using nightlight images from satellites. This is one of the proxies that we could use. And another really good example that we were able to come up with was how we could use mobile money in Africa to actually measure economic activity in places that we do not have, like, for example, credit union, right? And again, we have this entire conversation of false positives and ethics around this issue. And my question to you is, how are we going to deal with these problems, right? Because first of all, is it necessary to quantify power? If I pretty much think that yes, it is possible and it is important, but like, how are we going to do this? Just how? And this is one of the questions I would like to ask you. And the final idea that we had was that what we actually call this the big data problem. With more information that we have instead of just having, by the law of statistics, instead of just having like a biggest representation of the entire population, we have like a more noisy sample. And why is that? Because the question that we had in mind was, are we using the correct data to answer these questions? And if not, or if yes, what kind of data should we use to advance our knowledge about the field, and why? We have to remember that when we're conducting empirical research, we are just throwing numbers into an algorithm, and the algorithm is going to spit an answer. But at the end of the day, we have to be aware that the question that should ask ourselves is, does this number make sense? Are we fitting the correct data into regressions, into linear probability models, into neural networks? Is this the correct way to solve this question? Or are we just or this is just one of the fields that we are going to keep a very abstract and theoretical, for just like nuclear deterrence, for example? So this is one of the questions that I would like to finish my presentation. I hope you find it useful, and thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Caio. And now I'm going to announce the poll that we have for the audience on whom do you believe power relations in cyberspace favors? And with this idea in mind, I would like to pose to the panel the question on how do they think framing cyber power with the concept of cybersecurity, including or not information, changes how we can not only perceive it, but also quantify or use proxies for dealing with that as like a force multiplier. So this would be a general question for you all. And I would also like to ask you, specifically thinking about diffusion of power, transition of power, and now more than ever with the coronavirus pandemic, it's obvious that we are even more dependent on digital infrastructure. how do you perceive the phenomena of technological nationalism? Because this implies in the normal powers and the emergent powers and their imbalance with this and then cyberspace capabilities. So I would like to pose these first two questions for the panel, and then let's go with the Q&A.
You can answer, Bruna?
Yeah, you can already answer if you would like to start, Danielle.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the question, and the question of the pool is very interesting. I think I will start to answer your question of technological nationalism and COVID-19 or COVID-19. Sorry, sometimes we think important. I think it's important to think about when you talk about technological nationalism, you talk about state. Doesn't exist nationalism without the state, without a kind of idea of nation. So when you look to hackers from China or hackers from Russia or hackers from Brazil, in the fake news and the hate gambit here in Brazil and our presidents, all are linked with a idea or a kind of idea what is a nation. So that technological nationalism is another way to exercise power for part of an agent of the state. So I don't know if it's a kind of a separate group, an individual group, independent group who cause damage in the international system. And for think about that, we need to think about what you define power is. When you pull that question here, who do you believe power relations in cyber favors? But what are you talking about? What is power? What effective power nowadays? So I think this is important. This is an important debate, because if you don't know what is power, it's impossible to measure quantitative in amount what is power, what is cyber power, because there is a difference. Resource of power, the amount of resource of power, there isn't power. Power needs strategy, power needs a political view, power needs ideological, power needs a lot of things. Doesn't matter if you want 10 airplanes, 1,000 of missiles, if you don't have a strategy or use them. You have a kind of a coercive way to influence the system, but power is different. So I think this technological nationalism, they works if the state are behind them. And for me, when you look at all the movement of nationalism or technological nationalism around the world, we saw the state behind that kind of. You can prove the state participate of that action, but you can saw the shadow of the state behind them.
Can I provide an answer, or Janine, do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to agree with what Danielle said, and I wanted to add that it also depends on the power relation you have. If you look at a principal-agent power relation, then you will see that weaker states will, for instance, benefit from power relations with hackers, for instance, because then the hacker who works for states will be then especially relevant for all those states when they lack the capability to conduct offensive cyber operations in the sense of I don't know, something like a cyber conflict or a cyber war. Just wanted to add that. And relating to your point, Bruna, how information also changes. I wanted I want to answer with Joseph Nice words what Caio said in his presentation. Maybe he can elaborate on that as well. That of course we have the power relation and the power of influence with fake news we have, and relating to the corona pandemic, we also see that a lot of fake news pop up, and this is also kind of power relation between those who create fake news and the rest. I just wanted to add that.
Oh yeah. One of the things that I would like to point out is that whenever we are talking, first, I do not necessarily agree with the idea of technological nationalism, because I think there's a two-sided coin in this situation. Yes, nowadays we have this, most people call it like the withdrawing of democracy, right? In times like these. But we also have technologies that are actually giving voice to people in a way and make them more representative in a lot of areas rather than before. And what do I mean by that? I mean that not necessarily, for example, you're going to have a state-sponsored organization that are going to perform some kind of action. Sometimes a person with access to the internet can simply do, can cause severe damage because he or she wants to do it. There's this aspect, of course, in a smaller scale compared to, for example, compared with state-sponsored activities such as, for example, the Red Star, which is the Chinese hackers, the grizzly bears of the Russians, the Ukrainians, and etc. But I believe that cyber hasn't achieved well, not that it hasn't achieved, because this is still evolving, but it hasn't come up to a point in which we are going to see much bigger nationalist movements as we see in real life. For example, for the independence of let's say the Strip of Gaza, or any of those movements. But I think it's a really interesting question. I just believe that it's too early to provide you with a concrete answer.
Indeed, we have more questions and answers in this panel, but I would like to launch our second pool that is more or less related with this question. It's about the elements, actually, that would constitute cyber power. So specifically, the question is, mark all the alternatives that you believe demonstrate power in cyberspace. So we have cyber infrastructures development, and cyber military force, cyber strategies, the size and age of a population, the number of cyber awareness and cyber specialists of a population, and people's willingness to influence or to use cyber responsibility consciously and to tackle cybercrime prevention. So more or less also following this idea, a lot of questions pop up in the Q&A, but some of them are related to, so with this double sword characteristics of cyber power, how could we tackle the stealthiness of it, especially at least for Caio in the quantification part, because if you do not have the data, how could then you provide the quantification? And also for Danielle and Janine, how could we turn this into a more legal aspect? Would cyber treaty more or less manage power relations, or at least state proxies, cyber proxies relations in this way? And we also have, I'm just grouping them, okay? We also have a very specific questions on how then independent cyber proxies would be, and how countries, emerging countries in Latin America, can operate with these non-material elements, as we are talking before, about the technology that is not their own. And just a final question, I think this would be very interesting for the panel itself. Is related to the hybrid warfare discourse. How would you see or position yourself relating to this concept against the background of the Russian-Ukraine case study that would integrate and subsume cyber capabilities and capacity under this type of hybrid warfare toolkit? So I'm just going to be a little bit strict now. Maybe if you could summarize in 5 to 6 to 7 maybe minutes. So I'm not sure who would like to start. Okay, Janine.
Okay, thank you. I want to start with your question. The alternative that I believe also demonstrates power in cyberspace. And I think there are two sides that are important. First, we have all those government institutions, the state organizations, such as, for instance, the cyber commands of each state, that are, of course, particularly relevant, I think, and relating to that, also the cyber strategy, because every cyber command force also has a cyber strategy, for instance. But this is just one side, I think. There's also another aspect, and that's that is the civilian power we have, especially when civilians got active, as for instance hackers, when they form as hacker organizations. We have seen that in China, where private citizens conduct cyber attacks on their own initiative against, for instance, other states who are the enemies of China. And I think these powers, the power that is there, we see when we look at hacker groups, especially in China, then these are also alternatives that demonstrate cyber power as well. I also want to say something to the legal part you mentioned, whether we need something, a cyber treaty or something like that. And I have one book which is relevant in that case, and I just wanted to introduce that. That's the Talent Manual on the International Law Applicable in Cyberspace. So that's the second version of the book. By the way, there's also a first version of this book. And for this book, there were different international legal experts working on how international law applies in cyberspace. And the Talent Manual is the result, and it shows that we already have a legal framework that applies in cyberspace, and that is applicable to cyber wars, cyber armed conflict as well. We have two kinds of law in international law. We have the use in bello and the use ad bellum, and those legal rules are presented in the challenge manual, and I really recommend that because it shows that that we have a legal framework already, and that we have jurisdiction in cyberspace, and that it's applicable. I think that's the most important point, that we don't need a cyber convention or a cyber treaty or whatever, because the law as it is, the international law as it is applicable in cyberspace in the 21st century. And there are also the United Nations are also working on that topic. There are because there are the United Nations groups of governmental experts who also work on the legal framework and how international law applies to cyber conflicts and to cyber operations. I just wanted to to say that.
Thanks so much. Maybe Danielle? No?
First off, my answer, I would like to say something about the how to measure the questions for Caio, but I would like to say about that, because I think Caio has a great algorithm to try to measure the cyber power. All right, but I think I don't know it's important to think about the amount of the resource, but I think it's important to try to perceive what is the capacity of each resource to cause damage, to influence the system, and try to do something like a table, a kind of give point for each one kind of that resource, and try to measure who is more important and analyze it. So which is power in that kind of idea, because I think when you put in your PPT the damage of North Korea doing USA, I don't know it's a great damage. Okay, and when they attack USA, but I think it's important because now a country like North Korea can act in the system. And with that answer, I try to answer the response about the different capacity in Latin American states or something like that. I don't know. I understand well your question. I think I don't know if the problematization are in how resource we have, but how we work with the resource we have. When I look at the pool here, which more important you believe demonstrate power in cyberspace, for me are two: cyber strategy and cyber resource. But cyber strategy is more important because we have a conscience about what you want in the international system. If you know what you want in the international system, you can use what you have, even the cyber resource for try to get that what you want. So I think is the if you look for the Latin America, the more powerful cybernetic resources from Brazil, don't give to Brazil a more powerful capacity to decide or to push something, act in the continent, in the region. So I think we have to, before you think about power, you need to think about what you want with power and what you want as a state in the international system. And after that, you can use the cyber resource, the hard resource, the software resource, the hackers, the nationalism group, everything. Thank you.
So we had a little technical problem with Caio. I think he's trying to come back. You know, like a cybersecurity workshop without
The final is
would be impossible. But let's give him a few minutes if he doesn't appear. I know we are already out of our time, but maybe I could just make one more question from the Q&A. Sorry. Let's say maybe it's related to the Internet of Things and biotechnology. So how do you see the threats to cyberspace in the next years in regards to Internet of Things and biotechnology? Does this scenario change? Maybe we will see electronic devices in our bodies. Does the scenario change the limits and the proper idea of cyberspace? And the imbalance of power, more or less, this idea from the Q&A. If you want to briefly discuss while Caio tries to come back.
Yeah, why not? So I think I start. I think that the cyber threats relating to the Internet of Things, for instance, will increase in the next year, because I think also the Corona pandemic has shown that, for instance, the World Health Organization has seen a dramatic increase in the number of cyber attacks directed at its staff, and I think that all the cyber attacks conducted by non-state groups and non-state actors will dramatically increase as well, because the Internet of Things, it's free. Everybody has access to it, and everybody can conduct cyber attacks if he wants to, even if he or she is not a cyber expert or a professional hacker. You can learn hacking skills because a lot of hacker groups are providing hacking tools and instructions on, for instance, how to conduct a distributed denial of service attack, for instance. So everybody can do that, and yeah, therefore I personally think that cyber threat will increase.
I'm gonna try to be super brief about like all the questions that have posed me. So here we go. The first is that no, Joseph Nye is not really sufficient to explain cyber power. I just provide you with an example that I believe most people are familiarized with. You have a lot of definitions and a lot of discussion about cyber power. We could include Valeriano, we could include Gartke, we could include Libnick, Pape, White, and a lot of other authors in this discussion. But I just try to make a point that will be more familiar, and that we'll try to reconcile the differences between theory and application. And when the question about if we do not have like the data, well, this is like a very interesting question, because it's not necessarily, the answer that we provide you is not going to be necessarily I think what you're going to listen, but we can always generate, like we generate data every single day of our lives, right? We can try to generate in a pretty much in a experimental setting. We can try to come up with something that can prove or disprove, or maybe you know, we can try to come up with something that answer or provide sufficient explanations for questions until someone comes up with a better approach. And that's why, for example, I wanted to show you the project that we did, which is called Project Atlas, in which we came from the simple hypothesis that devices in the cyberspace, they are both a source of weakness and power. Discussing this idea, like nowadays we see that there are a lot of flaws in these assumptions, and that's why I provide you with this idea. I would like to hear from you, like what are the things that we could use to further our knowledge from in this field, right? And I think that's it. I think these are the questions that I had to answer. So, and I'm sorry again for this technical problem. Chinese hackers.
Yeah. Oh, things happen in this online event. But thank you so much for you all. And since we are a little bit ahead of time, I'm going to call the shots here and end this panel. Thank you so much for all of your insightful presentations and the discussion. And with the end of this panel, I would like to give some final words. First, I would like to thank you all for your engagement and attendance. The workshop was only possible because you made it. So until the end, we had more or less, let me check, 72 people online connected. So thank you very much for making the workshop so fruitful. I would also like to thank all the panelists and mediators for taking their time to provide us with such delightful discussions. And finally, but yet importantly, I would like to thank each one of the organizing institutions for their support to develop this workshop, and also to all the staff that helped me to provide you this online event. So with that, and I know a little bit ahead of the time, I officially close this workshop. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruna. Thank you all.